Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today I am back with yet another new review. This is the new Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk Beautyverse Love Palette. So this is her holiday palette for 2024. I feel like this was leaked months and months ago, but I am really excited to finally have my hands on this. I know that the brand has definitely changed over the past few years, but Charlotte Tilbury is still one of my very favorite makeup brands. So I am always excited to have a new launch from Charlotte. So this palette has an 18-month shelf life and is made in Italy. This retails for $75 US or 95 Canadian. So this is not an inexpensive palette. I should mention, if you are ever purchasing something off Charlotte's website, I do have a code which can save you 15%. It is a one-time use, but it is definitely there for you if you're purchasing this or anything else from her website. You can always use that because her products are pricey. So this is currently available on her website. I imagine it will eventually come to Sephora, but as of right now, it is only on Charlotte Tilbury's website. So this is what the inner palette looks like. So it's actually the same sort of 9-pan format as last year's palettes, but it is in this more simple packaging, but it does have some pink rhinestones on the packaging. So basically this is like a blown up version of the Hypnotizing Pop Shots. This is what they look like. So this looks so cute and little next to the larger palette, but basically the exact same packaging. And the Hypnotizing Pop Shots are available once again as well. So just in case you were looking to check those out. And this is what the inner palette looks like. So we are getting more of that rosy mauve type color story this year. And I do think this color story is really quite beautiful. I really do love my pinky mauve tone, so this color story makes me pretty happy. So let's get into some swatches. And the first thing I want to note is that the mattes in this palette are actually her Future Matte formula, which is like a cream to powder. I believe someone told me that that Future Matte formula was in her Icon palette a few years ago. I never purchased that one, but the 3 brown shades in last year's palette were also this Future Matte cream to powder situation, and the pink was a standard matte. All of the 5 mattes in this year's palette are those Future Matte creamy shadows. But let's get into these swatches. So first up we have Futuristic Pink, Cyber Rose, Supernova Smolder, Virtual Romance, Offline. Then we have the Pillow Talk Beautyverse Party Topper. We also had a Party Topper in last year's palette. Then we have Pixie Pink, Rose Gold Realm, and Digital Pink. So my swatches were definitely not in a straight line today, but I do think this color story is very pretty and it is definitely very reminiscent of some other palettes in my collection. So I definitely do have some comparisons to show you toward the end. So I think for today, I was debating on doing eye swatches again, but I think today I just want to create 2 different looks, and then toward the end, I will show you some comparisons to some other palettes I have, and I do have a few. So I am excited to do that. So let me zoom you in and we can get into creating 2 different looks with this palette. And one thing I want to mention right away is I feel like this shade here in the top corner and this shade in the top corner, I feel like they're quite similar to one another. So I do kind of feel like they're almost redundant, but we're going to test it out and see. I do think one has a little bit more purple to it, so I'm going to start with the shade right here. This is called Futuristic Pink. So starting on this eye, I do just have a little bit of foundation on my lids that I set with some powder. And the shadow's blending perfectly fine with the powder I had down first. And that one dip into that shadow actually went a really long way. I feel like that did an awful lot. And it's quite pigmented as well. But that is what I remember from the other palette as well. And last year's palette is actually one I continued to reach for throughout the year as well. So that definitely tells me that these palettes do kind of become staples for me. Just grabbing a smaller brush, and I think I'm going to go into Supernova Smolder, which is right here. I do want to see, like I said, I feel like these are almost redundant, but I want to see if that's just me or if there's kind of a purpose to having both of them. Yeah, see, it's a tiny bit deeper, but I don't really feel like it's actually doing anything. I feel like I could have got the same impact with that first shade that I used. With that same brush, I'm going to go into Virtual Romance. I do not normally like these more red tone shades on my eyes, but I actually used one when I was reviewing the Too Faced Aptly in Love palette for fall. And I created a look with a red tone shade like this that I actually really loved. So I kind of want to see if I can create something similar with this palette. I'm just blending those edges. These cream to powder shades do blend so beautifully. Okay, so now we have that done. I'm going to take the Pillow Talk Party Topper. That's this one right here. And so this shade is really meant to just add some sparkle to the lid. It's not really supposed to have a lot of pigment to it. But when I swatched it out, it actually looked like it had more of a base than even last year's Party Topper did. So just patting this one all over the lid. Yeah, that's really pretty. Definitely a little bit more of a base to it. Like I said, the Party Topper is really supposed to be like a glitter top coat, but this one has definitely more to it than last year's. So this one could definitely be worn all on its own. And that is really pretty. So I'm just going to take a smaller brush and I'm just going to go into Digital Pink. Just taking a little bit of that. This is a shimmer, but it is kind of creamy as well. And I just want to pat this one on the outer corner to sort of mesh that pink shimmer into the outer corner a little bit better. I do feel like with the cream to powders, they're beautiful. They're definitely buildable, but they will kind of blend away if you're not too careful. I do feel like they take so much of the work out of blending because they just melt together so beautifully, but if you overblend, they will sheer out maybe a little more than you would like. So just keep that in mind when it comes to those cream to powders, but I do still think they're a beautiful formula. And I actually really like how that look came together. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so let's get into look number 2, and I think I'm just gonna start with Supernova Smolder this time because I didn't feel like there was a point in using both of those shades. There is a slight difference between them, but I don't feel like it's enough. You could also create some really beautiful fully matte looks with this palette, just given how easy these mattes blend and work together. Grabbing that smaller brush again, I'm going to dip into Offline, which looks really deep to me and I think is a shade I will probably use more often as a liner, but I kind of want to see how it works and blends. Okay, it's definitely pigmented. Would definitely be a beautiful liner shade. I'm going to go back to my initial crease brush. It's blending beautifully with the brush I used, but I really don't want it to get any deeper, so I'm just going back into this brush just to help it. I do, like I said, love how these mattes blend together. There's definitely no stark line between the first shade and the shade you put on top, which I always think is lovely because sometimes that can be hard to get rid of. And I think I might just grab this middle shade here, since we're playing with these browns, and I might just take this one on the lid. This is definitely a bit more of a smoky mauve shade for sure. And this is pretty, definitely darker than I would normally go, but I still think it's quite pretty. And I should mention, I'm really not getting much fallout with these shimmery shades. Even that Party Topper, not a lot of fallout, so I'm impressed by that. But because this one is definitely deeper, a little more smoldery, I am going to grab that Party Topper again. And I do want to place it on the inner corner and then start to overlap it with that deeper shade and then just bring it up a little bit, but not all the way. That gave a really pretty brightness to the look while still maintaining that depth. Okay, I've also just decided this is going to be a 3 looks video. So let me pop on some mascara, come back and show you the finished looks, and then I will take these off and create a 3rd look. Alright, so here are the finished first 2 looks. So this is the first one, then on this side we went a little bit deeper, and I actually like both quite a bit. I do like the lighter, brighter one, of course, but I do actually like this side as well. So I like that you can definitely get something that's a little bit lighter, brighter, a little more fun, and then you can go with something a little bit more smoky with those more mauvey brown tones. I do think that is really pretty, and like I said, I really do like how both of these turned out. I think that's really pretty. So let me take these off and then I will get into look number 3. So for the third look, I wanted to keep this pretty simple. So I'm just going to start with this middle shade over here. This is Cyber Rose. This is going to be my crease shade. And this is a really pretty pink. It is definitely brighter than the other two in that top row. And one thing I will say about this year's color story as opposed to last year's is, as much as I loved last year's and reached for it quite a bit, I do think this year's color story is a bit more cohesive. Last year we had some neutral mattes. We had a matte pink and then we had a silver, a purple, a brown, a pink. So this year the color story does make a little bit more sense to me. Okay, I'm going to use a smaller brush. I'm going into that exact same pink shade that I just put in the crease because I want to kind of use this to deepen the outer corner. But I'm using a smaller, denser brush so that it doesn't buff out quite so much. Now I want to go into the only other shade I haven't used, and that is this one here on the bottom. This is Pixie Pink. That is really pretty as well, and I really, again, don't feel like there's a ton of difference between this one and the Party Topper shade. Just building this one up a little bit more. So that's pretty. I do think I want to pick up a little bit of that Party Topper again, just so that I can see what it looks like. It's definitely a little bit shinier, a little more sparkly, and a little brighter. Okay, good to know. So the Party Topper still has a place, even with that shade. It is definitely sparkly. It does still have a purpose. It does still look very pretty. Okay, same thing on the other side. And just adding that Party Topper to this side as well. So that is the finished final look. It really does end up looking quite a bit like the very first look we created. I did, of course, use that red on the outer corner, so it was a little bit deeper, but really there's not a lot of difference between this one and the very first look. Okay, let me zoom you out and then get into some comparisons before I share my final thoughts. So now that we've created 3 looks with this palette, let's talk about it. That Pillow Talk Party Topper kept reminding me of the Pillow Talk Diamonds shade from the Hypnotizing Pop Shot. So I think you can see there is a definite similarity between that shade on the bottom as well as over here. I did swatch it right next to the Party Topper and you can see shade-wise they're not much different. If anything, I would say the Party Topper shade from here is actually a little bit smoother in my experience, but I do think they're beautiful. But just keep that in mind. If you're ordering this, you probably don't need to order this shade in the Pop Shots if that's what you're thinking about doing, because it's pretty much in here too. And on the eyes, you're not going to notice a difference between the two. Now, the very first palette that came to mind when I saw this new Love palette is the Natasha Denona Retro, just with a lot of these pinky mauve tones. And I'll put up the swatches right here and you can see I was definitely able to get some similarities, not 100% shade for shade, but once again, quite similar. So definitely similar to the Retro. I don't think you need both, but again, I didn't get shade for shade dupes. The next comparison I'm excited to show you because the palette is actually a very affordable option, and this is from ColourPop, and this is the Smokin' Roses palette. So beside the Charlotte Tilbury, you can see there's definitely a very similar color story, a lot of similarities, and you can see from the swatches, I almost got perfect shade for shade dupes. The only shade I really wasn't able to replicate was this one right here, but quite honestly, you could use one of the mattes and a shimmer from the Smokin' Roses and get something pretty similar. I was very, very pleased with how close Smokin' Roses is. So if you do have Smokin' Roses, you do not need this color story. Is the Charlotte Tilbury formula better? Yeah, in some ways. I do think you'll get a lot more depth out of the Smokin' Roses, and you obviously have a ton more options. The packaging of this is definitely more luxury and glamorous, but you do get 9 shades. And like I said, the mattes, though they blend together beautifully, they blend into one another. I do feel like we have some redundancies in here. So if you have Smoke and Roses, you definitely don't need the Charlotte Tilbury. Okay, the next palette I wanted to pull out is the Sigma New Mod. So definitely some similarities here as well. The Sigma definitely gives you a lot more brown options as well, so you can lean into those neutrals if you want. And when I swatched them, I wasn't able to get as many similarities as I thought. Which one do I like better? I would probably say the Sigma, because I really do like that I also have a nice mix of browns in here. And I honestly use this quad right here an awful lot. So I would say I do kind of like the Sigma better, but again, I wasn't able to get shade for shade dupes. And lastly, I did swatch it next to the Patrick Ta Major Volume 2 palette, the Rose. So we have some similarities, not shade for shade dupes. Once again, I would say this is probably actually the least similar compared to the other ones. I'm still a little bit baffled by how well the Smoke and Roses palette compared. So the Patrick Ta wasn't as similar as I thought. So if you were thinking about this one, definitely take a look through your collection, because it's highly possible you have it. If you have Smoke and Roses especially, you definitely don't need this one, or even if you have the Natasha Denona Retro, I don't think you need this one. If you want it, it's great quality. So I will show you what I mean compared to last year's palette. So I loved last year's palette as well. Like I said, I've used it a ton, but last year there really wasn't any redundancies, which was nice. But I feel like the color story was a little bit more random. I didn't fully know how to use that silver with the other shades that were in here. And even the purple I wasn't 100% sure on. So I feel like last year's palette, while beautiful, wasn't as cohesive as this one. This one is definitely a very cohesive color story. That being said, I do feel like we have some redundancies. These corner shades down here, they look pretty similar. So there are some slight tonal differences. This one is a slight bit deeper, but it's so slight that I really don't think it matters. I feel like she could have just gone with this. We did not need this one. And also the Party Topper, while it is slightly brighter than this one and a little bit more sparkly, they're also kind of similar. Again, looking at those swatches, they are pretty similar. I love that we have this pinky mauve color story, because I love this type of color story, and I love that she did throw in some browns in there to kind of anchor everything down. And I do love the packaging of the palette. I like the formulas. I do love her cream to powders, and I do love the color story in general. And I think if you were wanting this one, if you've been eyeing it up, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I would say just check your collection, because you might have these. I do think it loses value in some of these redundancies. There could have been more variation to it, so I really don't know that it's worth the hefty price point that is this palette. However, the packaging and quality of this palette are beautiful. I love the looks I came out with. The first and third look definitely ended up looking quite similar, but I still really, really like these looks, and I can see myself going for these regularly. Whenever I go for color, it's usually pink or purple or green. I've said that before, but like a pinky mauve color story is such a go-to for me that I do think I will get a lot of use out of this palette. So for me, this palette is a great purchase. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And if you're going to pick it up, I would wait for a sale. If it comes to Sephora, I would wait for the Sephora sale. You can also use my 15% code. I think there's a lot of other creators that also have codes as well. So I would definitely use a code to get this if you're getting it. Again, it's just a really expensive palette in general. Add in those sort of redundancies, and I think it makes it even less of a value. So would I recommend this? If you just really want this one, if you love Charlotte Tilbury, then absolutely. I think this is lovely. I love this color story. I love the packaging. I love the formulas in general. I think it's all beautiful. If you're on the fence about it, I would perhaps just check through your collection. Do you have color stories that are similar to this? And if so, you could probably safely skip it. I think it's a very, very pretty palette. I just really don't love that we have some shades that are kind of redundant. And also I was able to almost perfectly dupe it with a ColourPop palette. Otherwise, aside from those redundancies, I do love this palette, and I will definitely be getting a lot of use out of this one. This is definitely a great purchase for me. But that is it for me today. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Were you thinking about purchasing this one? Did you already? Let me know all of your thoughts. I just love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!